Support for this podcast comes from Namely. When was the last time you checked your pay stub or picked benefits at work? Chances are, it wasn't easy. One company is working to change that. Namely is the all-in-one HR, payroll, and benefits software employees love to use. Clock in, change benefits, schedule vacation, and more from your desk or on the go. Get a free demo by visiting namely.com/podcast. One more time, that's namely.com/podcast.
Hi, Undisclosed listeners, Rabia here. Now, before we get into this week's bonus episode where we answer all the questions that remain about what's going to happen with Adnan's case and this new appeal ruling, I have a little favor to ask you. For the last 3 years, we have been raising money for Adnan's legal defense at launchgood.com/freeadnan. Now, if you go to that website, you'll see it looks like we've raised a substantial amount of money, but the truth is we've actually spent almost all of it on legal fees in the past 3 years because, well, it's been a busy few years in court. So, we know we have a fight ahead of us and we need to continue to raise legal fees. So if you can give something, anything, 10, 15, 20 bucks, $100, whatever it is you can afford, we would really appreciate it and it would go a long way. So once again, that website is www.launchgood.com/freeadnan. Thanks so much. Hi, and welcome to Undisclosed. This is our second bonus episode that we're doing just to update you on recent developments in the case of the state versus Adnan Syed. This is Rabia Chaudhry. I'm an attorney and author, and I'm here with my colleague, Colin Miller.
Hi, this is Colin Miller. I'm an associate dean and professor at the University of South Carolina School of Law, and I blog at Evidence Draft Blog.
We also have a special guest with us this week, and that is attorney Erica Suter. Erica Suter is a post-conviction and appellate criminal defense attorney practicing throughout Maryland and Washington, D.C. She blogs on the subject at marylandpostconviction.com, and since establishing her firm in 2011, the life sentences of 10 of her clients have been modified or vacated. Welcome to the show, Erica.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for being here.
Now, as we noted in our first update episode, on March 29th, the Court of Special Appeals of Maryland affirmed Judge Welch's order granting Adnan a new trial. So the question that follows is, what happens next? Well, the state has 30 days to file what's known as a motion for reconsideration with the Court of Special Appeals, meaning there's a deadline of April 30th. There are 4 possible grounds that the state could move for reconsideration on. 1, if the Court of Special Appeals opinion didn't address a material factual or legal matter raised by Judge Welch. 2, if a material change in the law occurred after the case was submitted and was not addressed. 3, if a significant consequence of the decision wasn't addressed in the opinion. And 4, if the opinion by the Court of Special Appeals conflicts with prior precedent by the Supreme Court, the Court of Appeals of Maryland, or the Court of Special Appeals of Maryland.
Here, COSA addressed every issue, the Court of Special Appeals, and there was no change in the law. It doesn't conflict with any precedent. There don't seem to be any unaddressed concerns. So if the state brings a motion to reconsider, it's almost certain to fail. But if the state doesn't file a motion to reconsider by April 30th, COSA will issue its mandate, which would mean that the state would have until May 15th to file a petition for writ of certiorari with the Court of Appeals of Maryland, which is the state Supreme Court. If the state does file a motion for reconsideration, that deadline would probably be pushed back a few weeks. Within 15 days of the state filing, the defense would then have 15 days to cross-petition on the cell tower claim and or the plea bargain claim, and I can assure you they surely will. The point of these petitions is to convince the Court of Appeals to take the appeal, because a court actually doesn't have to hear either appeal. In fact, in most cases, it doesn't allow appeals. In criminal cases in 2014, the Court of Appeals granted 12.3% of cert petitions. In 2015, it was 9.2%. And in 2016, it was 10.5%. But those numbers might be largely meaningless because only about 1% of Court of Special Appeal cases have a dissent. And a dissent greatly increases the odds that cert will be granted. Now, Colin did some research on this and found that in the last 10 reported criminal cases by the Court of Special Appeals in which there was a dissenting opinion, the Court of Appeals granted cert in 8 of them.
So what does it take for the Court of Appeals to grant cert and hear an appeal? There are 7 active judges on the Court of Appeals, It usually takes 3 of those 7 judges voting to hear the appeal for cert to be granted and for the court to take the case. If for some reason 2 or more judges recuse themselves based on things like conflict of interest, it would only take 2 judges to grant cert. So let's break down the scenarios. First, it's unlikely, but the state could decide not to appeal to the Court of Appeals, which would mean that Judge Welch's order granting a new trial would take effect, and the state would then either re-prosecute, drop the case, or try to negotiate a plea deal with the defense. Second, which is far more likely, if the state tries to appeal and the Court of Appeals denies cert, the state would then have 90 days to file a petition for writ of certiorari with the United States Supreme Court, which is even less likely to hear the case. Assuming the Supreme Court denies the cert petition, again, Judge Welch's order granting a new trial would take effect. Third, let's say the Court of Appeals of Maryland decides to grant cert. There would then be a new round of briefs by both sides and oral argument to be held before all the judges this fall. Now, unlike the oral arguments at the Court of Special Appeals, these oral arguments would be live streamed, meaning any of you as listeners could tune in and watch the oral arguments live. The Court of Appeals of Maryland would then have to issue its opinion by August 31st, 2019. At this point, once again, the losing party would then have 90 days to file a petition for writ of certiorari with the United States Supreme Court. So the question then becomes, will the state in this case seek to appeal? In an interview with Baynard Woods the day after the opinion was issued, Thira Vignaraja commented that, quote, "The office is reviewing the decision that just came out yesterday to determine what's an appropriate next step." So, Eric, I guess we'll pose a couple of questions to you as the post-conviction guru in Maryland. First, in terms of that motion for reconsideration with the Court of Special Appeals, what's the likelihood that you think that the state files one of those?
I mean, I suppose it's always possible, but I would not expect that the state would file that motion for reconsideration. I think it's sort of a waste of time.
And that's because looking at those 4 grounds we discussed, you don't think there's really merit to any of those grounds for relief?
I think that's right. And I think they just sort of would want to move the case forward, and the next logical place to go would be to seek cert in the Court of Appeals. I mean, they could do it, but it would feel, I think, more of a delay. And there's one other thing. If the Court of Appeals denied cert, they could also file a motion to reconsider that denial of cert grant too, which would be acted upon very quickly, wouldn't take up that much more time in the process, but they would have that option.
I mean, to me, I feel like it would strategically, why wouldn't they delay? I mean, just by filing it, adding a few more months or whatever it is, I feel like that is part of the strategy, not just in this case, but I think this happens a lot in a lot of cases. People just file appeals, the state files appeals. It doesn't take a lot for them to do it, right? I mean, it doesn't take a lot of time, money, effort. They just keep kicking the can down the road. And I think that is part of, I just don't see the reason they wouldn't want to delay further.
Right. I mean, this case, I think, is unique in my experience sort of with the appellate stage of post-conviction practice, the state filing a motion. And this is just sort of anecdotal. I don't have a control group or something that I'm looking at. But I think typically they wouldn't file that motion to reconsider. It wouldn't result in much more than a delay. But, depending on the optics that they're concerned about, it's certainly possible. And there isn't a downside for them to file a motion to reconsider.
And then, so Erica, you said you think it's pretty unlikely that the state files this motion to reconsider with the Court of Special Appeals. In terms of that cert petition to the Court of Appeals in Maryland, what's the likelihood that you think that the state files one of those?
I would be surprised if they didn't file it, given the posture of the case and given the state's sort of consistent position all along. I think that I would be surprised if they didn't. I think it's very likely that they will file the cert petition.
And then we laid out, generally speaking, pretty low odds of a cert petition being granted. But then conversely, in cases of a criminal nature that are reported with a dissent, it seems quite a high rate that we have these cert petitions being granted. Do you have any sense of what the odds are that the Court of Appeals will grant cert in this case?
I mean, I always find it fascinating to see, because sort of when you're in the middle of it and practicing, I don't often have the opportunity to step back and look at the statistics. You're just sort of more concerned with your own individual case. So the statistics that you guys were talking about are really interesting to me. I think, so yeah, of course, it's unlikely in general that a cert petition is ever granted statistically. I think, I don't have a good grip on the numbers, but in this particular case, I think it's likely that the Court of Appeals would grant cert because it's a reported opinion, because there is a dissent. I think we can't talk about this case without talking about the public interest in it. And then I think also because the majority opinions talked about the fact that there was no Maryland case exactly on point with regard to failure to investigate in the context of an ineffective assistance of counsel claim. Whenever you hear there's no Maryland case on this, that's sort of a red flag that the Court of Appeals, who's interested in making law, might be interested in the case.
And I guess the last question I have is, assuming the Court of Appeals does grant the state cert petition, do you see any real chance that they don't allow the defense to appeal the cell tower ruling, or do you think there's a possibility they could allow the alibi appeal but not the cell tower appeal?
I think it's possible that they could allow the alibi and not grant a cross application for cert on the cell tower issue. I think that's possible. Well, I mean, I guess depending on a number of factors. The alibi issue, I think in the Court of Special Appeals, I was looking back and looking at my notes from oral argument, and it was so clear that's what the Court of Special Appeals was interested in. As far as the waiver issue, it's interesting. And of course, the court can always excuse waiver with regard to the cell tower. But I think one thing that I thought was interesting in the Court of Special Appeals opinion was they were saying that an argument wasn't made below in the post-conviction court that the court could simply excuse waiver. And I wonder I wonder how that would factor in if that argument is lost, or if he can go ahead and make that argument at any time, since the court has the power to excuse it at any time. I'm not as convinced that they would be interested in the waiver issue as they would be in the alibi issue.
It's not often that Susan, Colin, and I actually get together in the same space because, as many of you know, we kind of record from our own spaces. Once in a while, we do have to come together to do some investigating. And next month, we're coming together for a very exciting event, CrimeCon. Susan, Colin, and I will be presenting at CrimeCon, which will be held from May 4th to May 6th in Nashville, Tennessee. We'll be at the Gaylord Opryland together on a panel to give a great talk about the case of the state versus Adnan Syed, about everything that's happened since Serial, about our own investigation and what we've uncovered. And we'll also be there to meet other folks interested in the case, to meet other podcasters, to meet other people who work in true crime. We're going to be giving our talk on Saturday, May 5th at 1 p.m. It's going to be called Undisclosed, Undoing a Conviction. And then at 2 o'clock, we're going to be having a meet and greet, so don't miss out. For more information, go to crimecon.com. See you guys in Nashville. So let's now pivot to some listener questions, and we've gotten dozens, if not hundreds of them. Many of them are kind of the same question posed by different listeners. So please don't mind if we don't read your exact question, but we're going to try to cover the entire range of the kinds of questions posed to us. So this question comes to us from Heather Schinner, and she says, as excited as I am to hear this, is anyone working on catching the real killer? I would like the Lees to get justice as well. So I'll respond to this. I get this question a lot, especially when I speak to audiences about the case. And I find it really interesting that people expect a defense team to be doing the work of the state, because catching a killer is the job of the police. It is